All right, this is the Big Douglas Show. He's rapper Big Pooh, and our guest today from The Athletic and the host of the Athletic Football Show is Robert Mays. Robert, thanks for giving us some time today.
Happy, guys. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, we start Fridays off with the birthday game. I'll name a celebrity, and we'll try to see how close you can get to guessing how old they are.
Oh, my gosh.
We'll start with Pharrell Williams. Pharrell has a birthday today.
Oh yeah, I know Pharrell is
he's sneaky old, which I know. And
yeah.
So is he like 51?
I think he's 48.
48 years old. 48.
I see. I went higher than I thought just because I've always known that he looks way, way younger than he actually is.
Definitely.
Let's see. Jackie Chan has a birthday this week. Jackie Chan.
I'm gonna say Jackie Chan is 57.
I'll say 58.
Jackie Chan is 67. 67
Wow.
years old, Jackie. Get all his unstuck. Gotta respect that. Billy D. Williams has a birthday this week. How do you think Billy D is? Feel like going to get a Colt 45 now.
I'm gonna say Billy D is 76.
That's way off, by the way.
Oh wow! So he must be in the 80s.
Is he in his 80s? Is he like 82 then? Because he's not
Billy
younger
D-
than that, right?
Billy D is 84 this year.
Wow.
Oh man.
84. And last one, Russell Crowe has a birthday this week. Russell Crowe.
54.
I'm trying to think of how long Russell Crowe has been famous. I'm going to say 49.
57.
Wow.
57 for Russell.
I have no sense of time.
Also, before we get on to the football, we'll do that. DMX passed today, was horribly sad. Pooh, did you ever get to meet DMX? Do you have any experience with him?
No, I never got to meet DMX. Just experienced him like any other fan through his music. And you know, I was putting in my group chat today, man. I just take solace in the fact that the world in general got to celebrate DMX one last time when he did the verses with Snoop.
Yeah.
And you know, the world got to give him his flowers and show him their appreciation. And I'm happy that he got to have and experienced that moment one more time before, you know, he was no longer with us.
That's well said. All right. Robert, I'm curious. My brother, shout out Stuart, called me the other day, asked me this. With 5 quarterbacks going most likely in the first round, history says that for whatever reason, like one of those will be a star. One of those will play for a while. And like 2 of them won't even hit their first contract, certainly not with the first team. Where do you think, which ones, who are the 2 that make it? Who are the 2 you think won't make it? You get where the exercise goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think Trevor Lawrence will be around for a long time no matter what, just because of how high I think his floor is with the talent. And even with one of the reasons for this, especially with guys drafted high, I think is because the infrastructure for those teams is typically bad, right? I mean, the talent around them isn't very good. There's reasons those teams are picking up near the top of the draft. I feel like whoever the Niners pick, that's not necessarily the case because they made that big trade up. You'd assume that, you know, this is a team that's 2 years removed from the Super Bowl. So them drafting a top 5 quarterback is a product of weird circumstances. You think Kyle Shanahan's pretty good. So they're almost not even in this conversation. But a team like the Jets, I think is such more of an unknown because even if we think Joe Douglas might be good, even if we have confidence in Mike LaFleur doing a good job as their offensive coordinator, there's no way to know. I mean, it's all projection. So let's say Zach Wilson is that guy that might not end up working out, but I think that says more about the circumstances than it does about Zach Wilson. And then I think the same goes for the next couple guys. I mean, wherever Trey Lance lands, I think it'll have a huge influence on that. If he goes to Atlanta, I feel very good about him developing into a decent answer for the long term, just because I think they have a lot of talent there. And I also think Arthur Smith has proven to be a really good offensive coach. And then with Justin Fields, if he's the fourth one taken, whatever. I mean, I think that's the big question. I feel like I would bet on Lawrence just being around for a long time. I think a lot of those other guys are going to be a product of their circumstances, like we tend to see with quarterbacks. And I think that Mac Jones feels like somebody who's going to play for a while, even if he's never going to be very exciting. It's kind of a cop-out answer, but I just think there's so many different factors that lend to this that I feel like it would be silly and kind of foolhardy for me to talk about it with any certainty or any confidence, really.
San Francisco didn't do all that for Pitts, right? Is that a conversation that really has
Oh,
to-
no, I think that's silly. I think that's a joke. It would be hilarious, though, if they did. I mean, I would love to see it, but I think it's hard to justify giving up 3 first-round picks for anyone that's not a quarterback, even if I do think he is a special prospect.
We all know that the NFL they follow trends, and now we have this trend of teams trying to win with a quarterback on its rookie deal before they have to pay up. And do you think, knowing that, understanding that trend, you're going to see any more movement in that top 10, or is it going to kind of depend on how the picks start coming in, as you know, when the first round of the draft starts?
I think it'll depend on what some of the teams up there want to do, right? Like if Atlanta is going to pick a quarterback, then I don't know how much more movement we're going to see because we're running out of spots. But if the Falcons are open to trading down, then I think you have probably 3 places within the top 10 that you could go get a quarterback if there was one left. You'd have Atlanta at 4. I don't think Cincinnati or Miami is going to trade their pick. You'd have Detroit at 7 potentially. I think they're a prime trade down candidate. And now with Carolina having Darnold, are they willing to get out of that spot if maybe the 4th or 5th quarterback falls to them? So that's going to be the question, I think, is what does Atlanta do and what dominoes does that set into effect? Because they really hold all of the keys to the draft right now. I think that their decision and the direction they go is going to be fascinating.
Absolutely.
Right, because next is Detroit, and then to your point, Carolina and Denver. Would it surprise you? I mean, surprise is never a good word because nothing should be surprising. But I mean, just because they got Darnold doesn't preclude them from drafting quarterback, right?
I don't think it does, but I'd be surprised still if they drafted one. I don't think it should stop them, but if they were to draft one, I would still be a little bit surprised. I think overall, when you make that sort of commitment, you trade a couple different picks and they've said that they want to pick up his 5th-year option. They potentially, I don't think they have officially done that yet. So they could be waiting to see how it unfolds before they do any of that. But it does seem like they're committed to him as their starter for the next couple of years based on the moves that they've made. The one move I wouldn't be surprised about is if Denver traded up. If Atlanta is that team that says, we think that Matt Ryan's going to be good for a few more years. Why would we waste this when we can use this as a multiplier for multiple picks? We can restock the roster because they need some young, cheap guys. And they could see this as an opportunity to do that. And I still, if I'm looking at it, just think that Denver is the team, has the motivation, has the rest of the roster, has the timeline to go up and make that sort of move. They like one of those guys.
I'm wondering who will be the first non-quarterback drafted in this draft. I'm seeing Kyle Pitts. I'm seeing Penei Sewell, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the offensive tackle. Like, who will be the first non-quarterback drafted? Because it seems like those guys are getting pushed further down the line as you see teams jockeying for position to get one of these quarterbacks.
It's a great question. I think it'll depend on who picks the first non-quarterback. Because if Atlanta stays there and picks, which I don't think they should do, I think of all the options that they have, that would make the least sense to me. Then I could see them picking Kyle Pitts if they really liked him. If it's Cincinnati, my bet is that they're going to take Jamar Chase. I think based on the conversations I've had with other people and the moves they made in the offseason, I wrote something for The Athletic today about how I think history would tell you that it's better to take a tackle there than a receiver. But I do think the moves that they've made show you that receiver might be the direction they take. So if the first non-quarterback is taken by the Falcons, I think might be Kyle Pitts. If it's taken by the Bengals, I think it would be Jamar Chase. I can't see Kyle Pitts lasting past the Dolphins at 6, though. I mean, that's mostly a gut feeling. I just think that when you look at the needs they have, how rare of a prospect he is, I think that Miami, nothing is going to stop them from taking him if he's there. You know, them having Mike Gesicki, I don't think would stop them from saying this is the best offensive weapon in the draft. All we're doing right now is trying to add offensive weapons to our team.
How many receivers do you see going in the first round? And who do you have as wide receiver 2 if Jamar Chase is wide receiver 1 for you?
I think it'll depend on how early the run is on guys. You know, if guys like Devontae Smith and Jalen Waddle and even Rashad Bateman are going to go in the top half of the first round, does that push somebody else like Terrace Marshall up into the back half of the first round because the team says we need a receiver, the other guys are off the board? So I think it could potentially be 5 if I'm counting right. And I'm not a draft expert. It's more like I don't know art, but I know what I like when I watch guys. And when I watch Devontae Smith, I just think he's a rare player. I mean, obviously there are concerns about the frame and everything else. It would be unprecedented. We've never seen a guy with his size consistently succeed in the NFL. And there's so much risk being the first to do anything. Being the first team to bet on a guy like that, it's always risky. But you watch him play and you're just like, I don't know, man. This guy he has a feel for it. He has a feel for the position and he just moves in these really confident ways. I was talking about it on our show this week. There is an assuredness to the way he plays the game. There's no hesitation. He's looked so smooth and fluid. It really is incredible to watch. It's somebody that just has such a feel for the position. So he would be that for me. I like Rashad Bateman though. You know, I watch him play and he just seems to have a really good sense of route running, how to set guys up. And a lot of the time when you have those guys that we call route runners, right? I think Keenan Allen is a good example. Devontae Adams is a good example. Those guys aren't that explosive or twitchy. Devontae Adams, I think, ran in the low 4.5s. Keenan Allen was even worse than that, even though he'll tell you that it's because his knee was bothering him at the combine. But those guys often aren't burners. And then you watch Rashad Bateman, he has like legit 4.4 speed. He can run away from people. So I think that's why he's interesting.
You think there's any chance that Bateman makes it to 19? Sorry, Pooh.
Oh, go ahead.
Absolutely. I mean, you consider all the different possibilities. I definitely think there would be. I mean, the mocks that people do that, you know, I like to track the places that track all of the mock drafts because it gives you a really good sense of where the movement is. And I think if you look at those sorts of resources, yeah, he could be there. And I love him for Washington, honestly. I just think that if you pair him with the other guys they have, it would be so interesting, but I just don't think that happens. Them going to get Humphreys in addition to getting Samuel, it just feels like they've plugged enough of those spots where I couldn't see them going receiver in the first round if there are other positions available that they like.
I'm interested who you see as tight end number 2 in this draft and your thoughts on, I'm a Notre Dame guy, your thoughts on Tommy Tremble's potential. We know he's not a finished product, but there's potential going forward.
I have not watched any of the tight ends. And it's funny because if you talk to coaches, a lot of them haven't watched the tight ends. It's a position that a lot of guys are coming to late just because there's so few options. So I was talking to people recently, like offensive coordinators who are like, yeah, I'm just watching the tight ends because it's not a multi-day process the way it would be with the tackles or the receivers or things like that. So like a lot of people in the league, I am coming to the tight ends later than most just because it's such a weak group. And I think that is really telling. You see the way that the sport has shifted at lower levels kind of affect the positions that are deep, the positions that have a lot of options at them. Tight ends just aren't used that much anymore, especially in college football. So you're not having a lot of true inline tight end prospects come into the league compared to look at how many different receivers and how many different types of receivers there are. I mean, it's amazing that you can get 5 different flavors of guys in a draft like this, where you have, you know, your tall guys like Terrace Marshall, you have, you know, your route running guys like Rashad Bateman, you have tons of small gadgety guys that could be available in the second round. And tight ends don't really have that array of body type. You know, they're just one type of guy, and that one type of guy just isn't as in demand in the college game as he used to be 10 or 15 years ago. And from everyone I've talked to, that infiltrates the quality of a class like this.
I was curious at that 19 spot for Washington, if say cornerback 2 is there. What are defensive coordinators saying about the importance of that secondary? It used to be like edge one was the most important, but with the spread offenses and quarterbacks getting the ball out so quickly, are we switching to secondary being more important than those front four guys?
I don't know if it's more important. I think that defensive coaches that I've talked to that really think a lot about this, it's just about depth now and it's about versatility. So even if individual positions, if you're looking at like outside corner and edge rusher, even if those spots, like the having a really good one, it may still be relatively equal. I just think the number of bodies you need on the back end in order to combat whether it's different personnel packages or fill different roles. I think that's really important. You know, the Rams last year, I want to say, used 9 safeties over the course of the season, and they were the best defense in the NFL. And I think that having that sort of versatility and all those options are really important. I think if you look at a team like the Browns this offseason and how they've spent their free agent capital, I think that's also really telling. You have John Johnson, who's a guy that can play safety for them, that can also walk down and play sub linebacker if they need him to. Troy Hill is somebody that played inside and out for the Rams. It's not an accident that the Browns went and got 2 guys who were in the Rams secondary last year. So I think that even if the best guys, even if you're comparing a guy like, let's say, William Jackson and Carl Lawson in free agency, I don't know how I would necessarily stack those guys, but I do know I need 3 other corners aside from William Jackson. I don't know if I need that many edge rushers. So I think it's more important to have more depth, even if at the top of it, the values are still pretty static.
Now, one position I see Washington being able to attack in the draft at 19 is safety. We haven't had a true free safety since Sean Taylor was wearing the burgundy and gold. Who do you see? Because I believe safety is, they're going to have their pick of the top ones at 19. Who do you see as the number 1 or number 2 safety in this draft?
I think that people really like the guy from TCU, Trevin Moehrig, who I think that he's apparently a really good, versatile player. And I think that is one of the interesting things to consider, because I don't know how the Washington would view this, but I know they ran a lot of quarters last year. And if they're going to live in a lot of too high looks, I think that distinction between free and strong safeties, I think that's slowly going to evaporate over the next few years. Because if you look at the way that defenses have trended, there was a while where everyone was living in the Seattle world. Everybody. You know, it was cover three, we need Earl Thomas. And those are the archetypes. You had one type of safety that did one thing and one that did another. And now that we're living in a world where more and more teams, I believe, are going to be at least lining up with 2 high safeties before the snap because of the influence from guys like Vic Fangio, Brandon Staley. And think about how many coaches on their staffs are now in other places. Aubrey Pleasant, the secondaries coach for the Rams, is now in Detroit. Aaron Glenn, who was the defensive coordinator the secondary coach for the Saints, is the defensive coordinator of the Lions now. They used to do a lot of split safety looks in New Orleans. So I think we're going to see more of that. And if we do you need guys that are more able to play a split role, that don't have to be as athletic, that are a little more versatile, they're a little bit smarter? And I think that Moehrig fits that. Everything I've heard about him is that he really does feel like a modern safety in the way that we want those guys, because they ran a ton of quarters and split safety alignments at TCU last year.
Aubrey Pleasant got us. Well, I don't know if he got to start with Washington, but he was here for a while, and people were sad to see him go. That's a bright guy. You think there's any chance that Washington trades up out of that 19 spot? Have you heard anything about that?
I would be surprised if they did. I think that, especially a big aggressive trade. Like, I think maybe they really, really love one of the tackles that is there at 19, and they say, we need a starter at that spot. Cornelius Lucas just isn't going to do it. Do we need to go get one of those guys? But I think that based on what I understand about that team, just in terms of mindset, I think they're aware of how you need to play the numbers in the draft. How it's more important to have more bites at the apple. It's more important to show humility in your ability to know who's going to be good and who's not. So I would be surprised if they were going to make a trade up. And I just don't think that they're a candidate to make a big, big swing at quarterback. Like, if they If Denver traded into the top 5 for a guy, I could see it. I would be really surprised if Washington did.
The numbers for Ryan Fitzpatrick have been sneaky, right? I mean, I think they actually think he is going to be an upgrade that can push the ball down the field, right?
Absolutely. And I just think he's the perfect guy to move forward on offense. And I think it's a few different things, because I think that if you're going to not really go get your guy, I think it's just really, it is necessary almost to clear this bar of competency that allows you to evaluate the rest of the offense and allows you to function. Like for most of last season, Scott Turner couldn't do his job because of the level of quarterback play that they were getting. And one, that makes it hard to understand who you are on offense, where you want to go, what your players really are. And two, it's just really hard to go to work every day. Like that's not fun to be a bad offense. I mean, they were the worst offense in the league last year pretty comfortably. And that's just not enjoyable to do. And I think that Fitzpatrick is the perfect middle ground to give him $10 million and have it be half of what you'd pay. Look at what Teddy Bridgewater got last year. It's half of that. It's half of it. And I think that's important to consider. And he is the perfect guy to say, we're going to pay you half of what a starting quarterback makes. And you're just good enough to allow us to identify and judge and evaluate everyone on the offense, but you're not good enough to stop us from taking someone next year if there's anyone better. I think that's the perfect solution for a team that's where Washington is in this exact moment of their trajectory.
I have a question about the Eagles. Do you think the Eagles made a mistake going out of the top 10? Granted, I didn't see them getting a quarterback or they wouldn't have traded out, but they need specialists. They need wide receivers. And they probably was in prime position to get one of the best wide receivers, if not the best in this class, in Jamar Chase. Do you think they made a mistake in trading back that far?
No. I think that they have such a deep, deep hole that they have to dig themselves out of. And I feel like this is going to be a process. And for them, I think stockpiling as many premium draft picks as you can to try to figure out the rebuild that they're going to have to go through, even if they're not going to call it that. I would do that 100 times out of 100. I also just wouldn't draft a receiver that high in almost any situation. Now, you look at the history of receivers drafted in the top 10, it's not pretty. Unless, and I've talked to offensive coaches about this recently. I wrote about it a little bit today with the Sewell Chase thing on The Athletic. There are people who think that unless your guy is a walk-in Hall of Famer, you don't draft him in the top 5 or top 6. Unless he's Julio or Calvin or AJ Green, it's just not the smart way to do it because there's so many other useful receivers out there. So even if they want a receiver, I don't know if there's any certainty that Devontae Smith isn't going to be better than Jamar Chase. And if you can trade down from 6 to 12, still get a guy who's going to be potentially a really good receiver and pick up another first-round pick in the process, I think where they are right now, it's a really smart mindset to do something like that.
Robert, where do you think that the league views Washington and where they're at now after 1 year
I
with
think with
Ron?
immense respect. I mean, I really do think that what they wanted out of Ron Rivera to have legitimacy, to just have a vision, all of that stuff, they accomplished that. I think that he just has an unassailable record among the people that you talk to around the league. I mean, people go out of their way to say stuff about him like that. You'll have a conversation, it's almost like a non sequitur. They'll be like, I really respect Ron Rivera. And I think that was really important. And I think that the guys they've brought in, with Martin Mayhew and Herney and, guys that have had GM chances and it hasn't gone great, but have experience in the job. And I think that brain trust is a really smart way to approach it. And I do think that they have a talent base. Like there's no denying that. I mean, you look at just the overall kind of ascending player. I always like doing that. When I'm thinking about where a roster is, how many ascending players are on the roster? How many guys do they have that are exciting now and can get better over the next couple years? And in Washington, I think that there's a lot of them. Obviously there's plenty of them in the front 7, but McLaurin is a really exciting player, and Antonio Gibson, to get him where they did and for him to look really like a complete back as a rookie. And I mean, they have a really solid offensive line. I really do think they're in prime position, and they were aggressive in free agency this year, but they had the money to do it. And I think that there's a chance they got some really good players out of that group. I think a guy like William Jackson is the right kind of bet in free agency. Betting on a guy with those first round traits and that physical ability, when you're also trying to figure out, and I love this mindset. They played a lot of quarters last year, a lot of zone coverage. That's what they lived in, and they did a good job of it. I think Chris Harris is going to be a fantastic coach. But now, in order to kind of stave off regression from that, you need to change. You need to be something a little bit different moving forward. And I think a guy like Jackson could comfortably allow you to play more man coverage this year, stuff like that. I just think that they have a good sense of who they are, where they want to go, and how they want to do it. And I think that that's the prevailing wisdom about them right now, is that they are going to be a team to be reckoned with if they can continue to make the right decisions over the next couple of years.
Speaking of aggressive free agencies, I'm interested on your thoughts of New England bucking their normal trend of finding the diamonds in the roughs and just going all in this free agency with the 2 tight end pickups, the wide receiver. I think they signed 2 wide receivers. They were just signing people left and right. They was always in the news. What are your thoughts on their unusually aggressive free agency this year?
I think that it's a product of them kind of living down in the dregs with everyone else for a minute in 2 ways, because teams that have to spend in free agency are teams that didn't draft well. Teams like Green Bay, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, these teams that are pretty traditionally quiet in free agency. Even a team like Cincinnati 5 years ago, because they had drafted so well. You're often allowed to live like that because you draft well. You don't have to spend money. And the Patriots from 2010 through 2015 were one of those teams. Just think about all the building blocks they found in the draft for years over that stretch. Your Devin McCourty's and Rob Gronkowski and Gerard Mayo and Vince Wilfork, who's a little older than that, but still just guys that were around for that stretch. That has evaporated. They have not drafted well. They've been very middle of the road, even if a little less than average over the last 5 years. And when you're kind of sitting there looking at the roster in February, or if you looked at it over the 2020 season when it wasn't fun, you're kind of sitting there asking yourself, how are we going to get better? Like, how are we going to add talent to this team? And free agency is the only avenue to do that. And I also think that experience combined with the fact that their coach is in his 70s now, like, I'm not sure there's going to be a lot of patience involved with the way they're going to do this. So I think it's a reaction to how bad they were. And I think it's a reaction to how poorly they've drafted. And I know we want to ascribe this magic to them, right? Like they know better than everyone else. But at a certain point, like, they are one of the other teams now. Like, Tom Brady's not there anymore. Like, they've made some mistakes like everyone else has. And now it forces you to not act in desperation, but to make moves that we would typically look down upon from other teams. Just because it's Belichick and just because those guys are going to be wearing Patriots helmets doesn't mean that these free agency moves they made were any shrewder or rooted in any grand theory that other teams that spend in free agency don't have.
I'm interested in your thoughts or just the thoughts around the league. Did Tom Brady really cement his legacy this year winning the Super Bowl? I know there was a lot of talk about, him and Belichick. Obviously, they were great together, but who was really the key cog in that relationship? And for Tom to go out in his first year outside of New England and win that championship, did that really, he was already a legend. Some call him the greatest quarterback to play the game, but did he really cement his legacy as the guy, from the New England years with that Super Bowl win?
I look at him differently now. I don't know if here's what I'll say. If you were stacking up the quarterbacks ever, he was already number 1. You can't go higher than number 1, but I definitely see him in a different light now than I did before last season. To do it somewhere else, to lift that franchise, to play the way he did in the Super Bowl, and just even to play the way they did over the second half of the season. In my opinion, I think what they did over the second half of the year is almost more impressive to me than winning the Super Bowl. I think them being the number 1 offense in the NFL by EPA per play, and by, I think, DVOA, they were number 1 over the second half. To come in your first season somewhere with no offseason, and by week 10, you can be the quarterback of the best offense in the NFL. That's insane. That is unbelievable that they were able to create that sort of firepower in the course of 1 year with a 43-year-old quarterback who had no offseason to work with these guys. Like that to me is what shifts his legacy. I think the playoff success is often random. It's bounces of the ball, everything else. But even to put themselves in that position and for him to play as instrumental of a role he did in putting them in that position, I think definitely changes the way that I think about him for sure.
To your point with the offense, is Brady the reason that Leftwich, to my knowledge, didn't even get an interview? I mean, to your point, it was the number one offense and it was flying. Now, is Brady get too much credit, and that's why Leftwich didn't get more credit for the work that would happen there?
Probably. I think that Leftwich is a role in that. And also, we've seen this, and I think it's a bad excuse, but I'm sure that when people around the league are thinking about a guy like Eric Bieniemy, they're wondering what role Andy Reid has in shaping that offense. Because Bruce Arians is an offensive-minded head coach who's in that room, how much of a role does he have in shaping it? I can tell you right now that Bruce would even tell you it's not that big of a role. That Byron is the one that handles installs and meetings and things like that. He has less of a role for the Bucs than Andy has for the Chiefs. But I absolutely think from the outside looking in, there are going to be people who have those concerns. I think those are unfounded. And I think that what Byron did over the second half of the year and their ability to pivot in the middle of the season and do more stuff that Tom liked, implement it, and just the feel he had as a play caller, especially down the stretch. And I think that might have been part of it, is that I really kind of stood up and took notice of him in the playoffs. That's when I really was like, he's doing stuff right now. There was a couple stretches in the Packers game where they're dialing up screens on 2nd and 8 at the right time. Remember the screen to Gronk that they had on the right sideline? I was there. So I'm like thinking about it. That kind of play, it's like, man, he really has his finger on this. He's pulling all the right levers and pushing all the right buttons. But by that point, everyone was already getting interviewed. That was late in the process. So I'm not trying to make excuses for the teams that didn't interview him. And I think that he should have a ton more interest. But if I'm trying to piece it together, that's probably what I would say.
I know it's 2 teams in the league that probably wish they would have thought about that when they hired Adam Gase after working with him. My question for you, Robert, I'm just attacking all the NFC East teams right now. The Dallas Cowboys, does Dak re-signing finally solidify them as one of the NFC East powers again, or do they still have, in your opinion, a lot of work to do, especially on the defensive side of the ball?
I think that they are personnel-wise in a really good place to compete. I've thought that for the last few years. Today on our podcast, we ranked the best 5 and worst 5 drafting teams of the last 5 years. And Dallas was like number 3. They've done an incredible job of adding talent to that roster, and they go 8-8 every year. Like it's a misallocation of the talent that they have. And even if you're looking at that offense and you're just kind of taking a peek at the depth chart, you're thinking, oh, all right, it's Amari and Michael Gallup and CeeDee Lamb in the slot and Zeke, and now Dak is back, and hopefully their tackles stay healthy, and they signed Ty Nsekhe as their swing guy, so they have more depth there, and they still have Zach Martin, and I think that Tyler Biadasz, their young center, can be pretty good. I mean, you look at the depth chart one by one, it's like, this is exciting. They can be a really, really good offense. But even when Dak was healthy last year, a lot of their success was just counting stats. Efficiency wise, they were like 15th in the league, according to a lot of stuff. He was throwing for a lot of yards because he was throwing a lot of passes. So even if you're excited about the talent that they have, I still think there are significant questions about whether Mike McCarthy and the rest of that staff is the group to point that talent in the right direction. And it's a similar question that we've been asking about the Cowboys for the past 10 years. Barnwell brought up on my show today, he's like, they found a potential Hall of Fame quarterback as an undrafted free agent and never won anything. Like, it's amazing how many chances that franchise has had based on some of the talent in that building, and they've just never been able to take advantage of it. And I think that we could be in a similar place. I don't know what Dan Quinn is going to be as a defensive coordinator. I think that if you look at where the league typically looks for its defensive coordinators, it looks for retreads. It looks for guys that were head coaches and eventually failed out of that and now are being recycled as defensive play callers. You see it this year with Quinn, with Gus Bradley. It happens all the time. And how high is your ceiling with a guy like that? I don't know. If you can get middle of the road from that defense, like let's say they're the 18th best defense in the NFL and you're a top 3 offense, that's a playoff team. But I think that's kind of the best case scenario. And I think you have to be betting pretty heavily on those staffs to get the most out of both sides of the ball. And I just don't know if I'm there with them yet.
Well, Pooh, you started. Let's finish it with the Giants. Is that the last team that we'll see draft a running back in the top 5 or 10? I mean,
I
that's done,
have to
right?
think so. I have to think so. I mean, it's just, hey, my dog's chewing stuff. I have to think so. I just think that it's so hard to get value out of it. It just, I mean, you just think about it structurally. There's so many things that have to go right for a running back to succeed. There's so many things. I think the most recent example that we've seen is what Mike Davis did last year in Carolina. You know, you have Christian McCaffrey, who was a top 7 pick, and he just got the biggest contract in the history of the position. And you take him out, and the offense probably wouldn't be any worse. I mean, these guys are phenomenal players. They're phenomenal athletes. A guy like Saquon Barkley is just endlessly gifted. But if you take him out of the equation, how much better or worse do you get? And I just think that's the nature of modern football. And you have to find true difference makers in the top 10. Like, you just have to. That has to be, if we did the study we did today, you just look at it and you look at the gaping hole that is left if you miss on a top 10 pick and what that does to your franchise for the next 5 years at any position. And it really is so impactful. And I just think that when you lower the ceiling on one of those picks, it just exponentially factors into the impact it's going to have and what you could eventually do with that pick. If you start at 50%, there's only so high you can go. And I think that's exactly what picking a running back in that range does.
And where are they just treading water? I mean, where do you see, I mean, do they have a direction they're going? I'm not sure.
I think that on offense, the way that they've spent, I guess on defense too, with the Jackson signing, but I think they tried to solve a lot of problems in free agency this year with throwing money around. We joked today, they were a team that spent money as if the cap didn't go down. Like the contracts they handed out, you'd think that everything was just normal. I mean, the Kenny Galladay contract is a perfect example. I mean, that's the type of deal I would have thought he'd get in a normal year. And he got it in a year where it's $185 million cap. And I do believe their defense could be good this year. I think that Patrick Graham, their defensive coordinator, did a really good job in year 1. I think he was really flexible. Talking to guys on that defense, I think he did a really good job of articulating the vision for what they wanted to be, explaining that to guys. I think they communicated well. And then you look at some of the additions they made. You know, Adoree Jackson's a solid corner. They get Xavier McKinney back, who was their 2nd round pick last year. I think you combine him with Peppers and with Logan Ryan. You have night, like we were talking about before, with versatility and flexibility on the back end. I think they could have that. My question is, what does the front 4 look like? You know, Leonard Williams is a guy who's getting paid like Khalil Mack now or Aaron Donald. Is he going to have that impact on a play-to-play basis? And if not, where's your pass rush coming from? Because they don't have traditionally dominant edge guys. I mean, Williams is somebody who splits his time 50-50. And is that going to be enough up front? But I do think the back end is intriguing. On offense, and there's still legitimate questions about the line. Who's going to play those tackle spots, I think, is something you got to ask yourself. And that's been a question mark the whole time. But I think it all comes down for them to the quarterback. You know, when I look at them, I don't have strong feelings one way or the other about how good they're going to be, because I don't know how good he's going to be. You know, there are aspects of his game where you watch him play and you're like, okay, like there are some throws where I'm like, this is exciting. This guy can be maybe not an elite starter in the league, but a guy that you can win with. And there are other times where it's like, this is a disaster. And he kind of ping pongs between those two. I mean, it really does remind me of Jameis. Like, I do think that the comparisons between them are apt. And if you flip the percentages, if the percentage of good plays to bad plays suddenly starts trending in the right direction, what does he start looking like? And if he becomes that guy, I think that the conversation about them shifts a little bit. But without knowing that, I think it's really hard to have a lot of faith one way or the other in what they're going to be.
Robert, we thank you for all your insight. We thank you for coming on today and your time. please let the people know where they can find you and what you have coming up next.
We're on the Athletic Football Show 3 days a week through the draft. So we've got a ton of fun stuff coming. I get confused about what's next. Well, next week, we're going to talk about which teams might be one draft away. You know, which team could be this year's Bucks if you hit on the right couple guys. Obviously, having the greatest quarterback of all time helps. But I think that Tristan Wirfs and Antoine Winfield were a big part of them winning the Super Bowl. We're going to talk to Jordan Rodriguez from The Athletic about the Rams draft process. We're going to do a top 10 mock with the writers that cover the teams for The Athletic. So we've got tons of fun stuff coming all the way up and through the draft. And I'm on Twitter at Robert Mays, and I pump out all the stuff through there. So I really appreciate you guys having me. This is fun.
No doubt.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Robert. We
again.
appreciate you.
Awesome, guys.
Have
Have a good one.